Samantha, 34. I always believed that betrayal would look obvious, loud, impossible to ignore. I never imagined it would glow quietly on my phone screen at 2 in the morning, thousands of miles from home, in a place my husband and I had dreamed about for years. Ryan and I had talked about Japan since the first year of our marriage. We used to sit in our apartment in Chicago, scrolling through photos of cherry blossoms and neon-lit streets, promising each other that one day we would walk there together. When he finally surprised me with plane tickets for our 10th anniversary, I cried in the kitchen, holding on to him and thinking I had chosen the right man. The first days were perfect in a way that felt almost scripted. We landed, exhausted but excited, and checked into a boutique hotel in Los Angeles before our connecting flight overseas. He joked that we were easing into the time difference in style. When we finally arrived abroad, everything felt surreal. We wandered through quiet gardens that reminded me of Central Park in spring, visited towering observation decks that made me think of the Empire State Building back in New York, and ate in restaurants that he had researched for months. He held my hand constantly. He took photos of me under glowing streetlights and said he wanted to remember every second. Our hotel room layout was unusual. It was one of those luxury suites with 2 separate bedrooms connected by a shared lounge area. Ryan said it would be better for sleep because he snored. I teased him about sounding like a freight train rolling through Dallas. We laughed, kissed goodnight, and went to our separate rooms. That night I fell asleep with the kind of contentment that makes you feel safe in your bones. I woke up around 2 in the morning with that disoriented feeling you get in an unfamiliar place. I needed to use the bathroom, so I padded quietly through the lounge area. As I passed Ryan's door, I noticed it was slightly open. The bed inside was empty. At first, my brain tried to be reasonable. Jet lag. Maybe he could not sleep. Maybe he went downstairs to grab water. Maybe he stepped out for air. Then something colder slipped into my chest. Earlier that year, Ryan had insisted on putting an Airtag under his phone case. He said it was practical in case he lost it during travel, and he had connected it to my phone as well, saying we should both be able to track it for safety. I had thought it was sweet, responsible even. Standing there in that dim hallway, I remembered. My hands were shaking as I opened the tracking app. The small circular icon blinked to life on the map. It was not in the hotel. It was moving. At first I thought it was a glitch. I zoomed out, then in again. The location refreshed. The dot settled in an area that even I, a tourist, recognized from the bright signage and reputation. The red light district. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. I told myself there had to be an explanation, a mistake, a misread. But the address was clear. The panic that had gripped me moments earlier turned into something else, a sharp, electric anger that felt almost clarifying. I threw on jeans and a jacket without even brushing my hair. I did not leave a note. I did not call him. I just followed the map. The streets were alive in a way that felt unreal at that hour. Neon signs flickered. Groups of men stood laughing too loudly. Women in short dresses leaned against doorways. Music pulsed from behind tinted windows. It reminded me of a distorted version of the Las Vegas Strip, except I was alone, in a foreign country, tracking my husband like he was a lost package. The dot stopped moving. I slowed down as I approached the building marked on my phone. It was narrow, glowing red from inside, with a small staircase leading up. My heart was pounding so loudly that I could feel it in my ears. For a second, I considered turning around. I considered preserving the version of my marriage that still existed in my head. But the map did not lie, and neither would what I was about to see. I climbed the stairs. The door at the top was not fully closed. Light spilled into the hallway. I heard laughter. His laugh. I would have recognized it anywhere. I had heard it in our home in Seattle when we hosted friends. I had heard it on hikes near the Golden Gate Bridge when he tried to scare me with stories about raccoons. I had heard it when he promised me that this trip was about us reconnecting. I pushed the door open just enough to see inside. Ryan was sitting on a low couch, leaning far too close to a woman in a dress that left nothing to the imagination. His hand was on her thigh. Her fingers were tracing the collar of his shirt, the same shirt I had ironed before we left. He was smiling in a way I had not seen in months. For a moment, everything inside me went silent. No screaming, no tears, just a hollow ringing. I stepped fully into the room. He looked up. The color drained from his face so quickly that it almost fascinated me. The woman pulled her hand back. The music kept playing. The lights kept flashing. The world did not pause for my humiliation. I did not create a scene. I did not cry. I did not shout. I just stood there, staring at him, feeling something inside me crack beyond repair. The husband who had planned this trip, who had kissed me under glowing lanterns hours earlier, who had said we would grow old together, was sitting in front of me in the red light district, cheating on me while I slept. And in that moment, under those neon lights, watching him scramble to stand up, I realized that this was not just a mistake. It was the end. I was shocked by what I saw, but beneath the shock, something colder was already forming, something steady, something that would not forgive. Update 1. If you ever want to see how fast a decade of marriage can collapse, watch your husband try to explain away betrayal as curiosity. After I stood there in that neon-soaked room and watched him scramble to pull himself together, I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not beg for an explanation. I turned around and walked out. He followed me down the stairs, calling my name, trying to catch up, but I kept walking through those glowing streets like I was moving through smoke. I do not even remember how we got back to the hotel. I remember silence in the elevator. I remember the reflection of us in the mirrored walls, looking like strangers who had accidentally boarded the same lift. When we reached the suite, I went into my room and locked the door. I did not sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed until sunrise, staring at the faint light creeping through the curtains. Every memory from the past 10 years replayed in my head, but now they looked different. Every late night at the office, every business trip, every time he had rolled away from me in bed, saying he was tired. My brain was stitching together pieces I had never thought to question. Around 6 a.m, I stood up with a clarity that felt almost frightening. I opened my suitcase and began folding my clothes carefully. Not in anger, not in chaos, methodically. Dresses went into one side, shoes wrapped in travel bags, toiletries sealed tight. I even folded the souvenirs we had bought the day before. I was not leaving in a storm. I was leaving with precision. While I packed, I booked a flight home. One ticket. Economy. The earliest departure I could find. I did not care about the layover in Los Angeles. I did not care about the cost. I paid for it with our shared card without hesitation. It felt almost poetic. At some point, I heard his door open. His footsteps paused outside my room. Then a soft knock. He asked what I was doing up so early. His voice sounded almost normal, like the night before had been an awkward misunderstanding. I opened the door. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, shirt wrinkled from sleeping in it. He glanced at the suitcase behind me and froze. He asked what was going on. Why was I packing? Why was I acting like this? That was the moment I finally spoke. I told him I knew everything. I told him I had followed the Airtag. I told him I had seen him. There was no room for denial, no room for confusion. The shock on his face lasted only a second before it shifted into something else. Not shame, not remorse, defense. He started justifying himself immediately. He said he had just been curious, that he wanted to see what it was like, that he had not planned anything serious, that it was just a stupid decision fueled by curiosity and alcohol and the novelty of being in a different country. He tried to frame it like a tourist mistake, like buying an overpriced souvenir you later regret. And that was when I felt something inside me harden completely. Curiosity. 10 years of marriage reduced to curiosity. We had stood at the top of a skyline observatory the night before, looking out over endless lights, and he had wrapped his arm around me, promising this trip would bring us closer. Hours later, he had been sitting under red lights with his hand on another woman. He kept talking. He said it did not mean anything. He said it was not emotional. He said he loved me. He said I was overreacting by packing, overreacting. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. I told him that if he was curious about that world, he was free to explore it. Just not as my husband. He stepped closer, trying to soften his tone, trying to downplay what I had witnessed with my own eyes. He said it was just a moment of weakness. He said every man has thoughts. He said he did not actually do anything serious. The fact that he thought I would debate the definition of serious after what I saw made me feel even colder. I zipped my suitcase shut. He asked if I was seriously leaving. He asked if I was throwing away our marriage over one mistake. He reminded me of our house in Denver, of the renovations we had just finished, of the dog we adopted last year. He tried to pull me back into shared assets and shared history, but all I could see was that couch, that red glow, that smile on his face that had nothing to do with me. I picked up my suitcase and walked past him into the lounge area. He followed me, still talking, still trying to rationalize. He said he was just curious what those places were like. That was all. Just curiosity. As if betrayal could be categorized as sightseeing. I grabbed my phone and called a taxi. He looked stunned when he realized I was not bluffing. He asked where I was going. I told him home. Alone. He tried one last time, saying we could talk this through, that flying back separately would only make things worse. He reached for my arm, not aggressively, but desperately. I stepped back. I told him that the only thing worse than being cheated on was being told it was educational. The taxi arrived within minutes. The driver loaded my suitcase into the trunk while Ryan stood on the sidewalk, looking like a man who had just realized he miscalculated everything. He asked if I would at least message him when I landed. He asked if we could fix this. He said it was not what it looked like, but it was exactly what it looked like. I got into the back seat without another word. The door closed with a finality that felt louder than any argument. As the taxi pulled away from the hotel, I watched him shrink in the rear window, standing there in the early morning light, alone. And I did not look back again as we drove toward the airport. Update 2. The longest flight of my life was not the one across the ocean, it was the one between denial and acceptance. When I landed in the United States, the air felt different, familiar, grounded. The layover in Los Angeles passed in a blur, and by the time I reached Denver, I was running on pure adrenaline and cold clarity. I did not text him when I landed. I did not tell him I was home. I turned off location sharing and muted his contact. Walking into our house alone felt surreal. The hardwood floors we had chosen together, the light fixtures he insisted looked modern, the framed photo from our trip to Miami hanging in the hallway. Everything looked intact, untouched, like nothing had shifted. But everything had. I did not collapse. I did not cry on the couch. Instead, I opened every window and let the air move through the house, like I was clearing out something toxic. Then I sat at the kitchen island and called an attorney. I had never spoken to a divorce lawyer before. Saying the words out loud felt sharp, but not fragile. I explained the situation calmly. Infidelity during an anniversary trip, separate return flight, shared assets, mortgage, joint accounts. The lawyer asked practical questions, and I answered each one without hesitation. By the end of that call, the illusion of reconciliation was officially dead. Over the next few days, I moved like someone executing a plan. I separated finances, I transferred half of the savings into a personal account under my name. I changed passwords, I gathered documents, mortgage statements, tax returns, property deed, car titles. If Ryan thought curiosity was harmless, he was about to discover how expensive it could become. He called constantly the first 2 days. I ignored every call. He texted long paragraphs about regret and misunderstanding. I did not respond. I knew if I engaged emotionally, he would try to pull me back into negotiation. I refused to let him reshape the narrative into a mistake that required forgiveness. A week later, he returned. I knew he was back before he walked through the door because I saw the rideshare notification on our shared credit card account. He did not warn me he was coming. He probably expected tears, a conversation, a chance. Instead, he walked into the living room and found me sitting at the dining table with a folder neatly placed in front of me. He looked tired. Not the dramatic kind of devastated, just unsettled. Like someone who assumed things would calm down with distance and time. His suitcase rolled behind him, wheels thudding against the floor. He looked around the house like he was assessing damage. Then his eyes landed on the papers. He asked what that was. His voice held that cautious tone people use when they already sense the answer. I told him they were divorce papers. The shock that crossed his face was real this time. He had expected anger. He had expected silence. He had not expected finality. He said we needed to talk, that lawyers were extreme, that we were acting impulsively. He insisted that what happened abroad was a lapse, not a decision to destroy our marriage. I listened to him try to minimize it again, and I felt the same cold anger rise inside me. He said it did not mean anything. He said he had not even known the woman. He repeated that word again in a different form. Curiosity, like it was a shield. I pushed the folder toward him. He refused to sign it first. He said he would not agree to end 10 years over one night. He said couples survive worse. He said I was letting pride take control. The irony of that statement nearly made me laugh. I told him calmly that if he refused to sign, I would take it to court. I told him I had already retained an attorney. I told him the evidence of infidelity, the financial records, and the timeline would all be documented. I explained that dragging it through court would only cost more money and expose more details. That was when I saw the first crack in his confidence. He had underestimated me. He thought I would grieve quietly and eventually soften. Instead, I had built a case. He paced the kitchen. He ran a hand through his hair. He tried one last time to negotiate, suggesting counseling, suggesting time apart without paperwork. He asked if I really wanted strangers deciding our assets. He tried to frame signing as surrender. But the surrender had happened the night he sat under red lights with another woman. I reminded him that he had already made his choice. The only thing left was paperwork. After nearly an hour of tension hanging thick in the air, he finally sat down. His hand hovered over the pen like it weighed 100 pounds. When he signed, his jaw tightened in a way that told me he still believed this was temporary, reversible, dramatic. He slid the papers back toward me without meeting my eyes. For a second, I thought I would feel relief. Instead, I felt fury. Fury that he had reduced our marriage to an experiment. Fury that he believed explanation could replace accountability. Fury that he seemed more shocked by consequences than by his own actions. He looked at me like he did not recognize the woman sitting across from him. And he was right. I was not the same woman who boarded that plane with him weeks earlier. I was not the woman who believed anniversary trips strengthened bonds. I was not the woman who assumed loyalty was mutual. As he stood there in our kitchen, papers signed, silence stretching between us, I realized something else. He was shocked by how fast everything had collapsed. I was furious that he ever thought it would not. Update 3. If you think betrayal ends when the papers are signed, you have clearly never dealt with a man who cannot handle consequences. After Ryan signed the divorce papers, I expected silence. I expected resentment, maybe cold distance, while the legal process finalized. What I did not expect was retaliation dressed up as family concern. It started subtly. His parents began calling me instead of him. At first, I ignored the calls. Then his mother left a voicemail saying they were worried and wanted to understand what went wrong. The phrasing alone irritated me, as if a 10-year marriage simply drifted off course on its own. 3 days later, they showed up at the house. I opened the door and found both of them standing on the porch, looking like they were attending a formal intervention. His father had that stiff posture he used during holidays, hands folded in front of him like he was preparing to deliver a lecture. His mother looked strained, but not angry, concerned, controlled. They asked to come in. I let them. They sat at the dining table where Ryan had signed the divorce papers. The same spot. The symmetry did not escape me. His mother started carefully, explaining that Ryan was devastated, that he had made a mistake, that he had told them he went somewhere he should not have gone, but that nothing serious happened, that he loved me, that 10 years should not be erased over one lapse in judgment. She framed it as weakness, as temptation, as something men sometimes stumble into and regret immediately. His father reinforced the narrative by saying marriage required forgiveness, that pride could destroy something worth saving, that walking away so quickly seemed extreme. It took everything in me not to laugh at the word quickly. I asked them one simple question. I asked if they knew where he had gone that night. I asked if they knew I tracked him. I asked if they knew exactly what I saw. They hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Ryan had fed them a diluted version of the truth. He had positioned himself as a curious tourist who wandered too far. He had minimized it into something survivable. So I told them. I described waking up and seeing the empty bed. I described tracking his Airtag. I described the red light district glowing on my screen. I described walking into that building. I described his hand on another woman. I described his smile. I did not dramatize it. I did not exaggerate. I simply told them what I saw with my own eyes. The color drained from his mother's face. His father's jaw tightened. They were not shocked that he had gone out. They were shocked at the details, shocked at the physical reality of it, shocked that I had confronted him on the spot. His father tried to regain control of the conversation by saying that men sometimes make reckless decisions when traveling, that environments can influence behavior, that it did not necessarily mean he did not love me. That was when something inside me snapped. I told them that love without loyalty was meaningless. I told them that curiosity was not an excuse. I told them that I had not spent a decade building a life just to become a footnote in his experiment. They left that day quieter than they had arrived. I thought that would be the end of it. It was not. 2 days later, my own parents called. My mother's voice sounded tense. She asked why Ryan's parents had reached out to them. That was when I realized the next move in his strategy. If he could not convince me directly, he would try to use pressure from both sides. We met at my parents' house in Phoenix that weekend. I walked in already prepared for resistance. My father sat stiffly in his armchair. My mother looked torn between sympathy and confusion. They told me they knew Ryan had made a mistake. They told me marriage was complicated. They told me he had called them and explained that he had gone somewhere inappropriate out of curiosity and regretted it instantly. They suggested counseling. They suggested time apart instead of divorce. They even hinted that maybe I had reacted too harshly without giving him space to explain. I stopped them. I told them everything. Not the softened version, not the protective version. The truth. I described the location, the building, the physical contact, the timeline. The fact that it happened hours after he had held my hand and talked about our future. As I spoke, I watched their expressions shift. Confusion turned into discomfort. Discomfort turned into shock. My father asked if Ryan had really minimized it that much. I told him yes. I told him he had tried to package betrayal as curiosity. I told him he had turned our anniversary trip into a personal experiment. My mother's eyes filled with tears, not because I was divorcing him, but because she realized how calculated the narrative had been. Ryan had tried to control the story before I could. That was when something solidified for me completely. This was not a man fighting for his marriage. This was a man fighting for his image. When I returned home, I sent Ryan a message informing him that any further attempts to involve family members would be documented by my attorney. I told him the divorce would proceed as filed. I told him I would not be manipulated through guilt or pressure. He responded with outrage, claiming I was humiliating him by telling everyone the details. He accused me of destroying his reputation. He said I was turning people against him. The irony was overwhelming. He had tried to use his parents. He had tried to use mine. He had attempted to reframe betrayal into curiosity, and now he was upset that the truth was inconvenient. A week later, his parents asked to meet one more time. This time, their tone was different. There was no lecture, no subtle blame. They looked tired. His mother admitted she had not known the full truth when they first came over. His father acknowledged that he had underestimated the severity of what happened. They did not apologize directly, but they did not defend him either. They were shocked, not because their son was imperfect, but because he had lied to them about the scale of it. And that was the final shift. The divorce finalized quietly after that. No dramatic courtroom battle, no screaming. Just paperwork and signatures and the division of assets. He moved out. I kept the house. The mortgage remained in my name. The accounts were separated. The life we built together was dismantled piece by piece. The story ended not with reconciliation, not with revenge in some explosive way, but with clarity. He tried to take revenge on me by weaponizing family pressure. Instead, he exposed himself to everyone. And as I stood in my living room months later, sunlight coming through the windows, the silence no longer heavy but peaceful, I realized something else. He lost more than a marriage. He lost control of the narrative. And I walked away, knowing the truth had done more damage to him than any revenge ever could.